You know, my therapist tells me that writing this third novel, if it really is going to exist, is going to cost me a great deal, that it may not even be finished by me in this life, it may be finished by someone else in the next, which is, may sound crazy, but it's not really. I hope that's not true. Frankly, I hope that he's completely mistaken in this, because I cannot imagine, like, if writing the third book costs just as much as it sounds like it could, given the subject matter and the setting and everything. I'm not in for that. I don't write about the First World War because, that just happens to be my subject. It's where I live. I find it culturally compelling, and I find my characters living. So the war part is like, well, it's unspeakable, but that's the social mission of this work, is to go to those places and try and resurrect things out of them that were really there, that were not war, that were the whole point, really. Whether it was mistaken or not, the war was fought to preserve things other than war. In fact, they thought it was the war to end wars. Anyway, that's a long prologue to what does happen during the writing of these books, is that you get to surprise yourself all the time with things that you just never had any idea were in you to write, that you would have written any other way, except by traversing this world where you really aren't. And this is something I'll take completely out of context, which nevertheless I most earnestly and completely believe, which Stan Allward, to make a long story short, says to himself when he's in a very tight spot. Now, let's see. Hopefully I can find it. Long prologue. There we are. There are essentially three categories of people, three classes, three armies: the living, the wounded, and the dead. The living write histories. Sometimes the wounded do. Well, after war everyone is wounded, so that the borders between these three countries are not fixed. You will say, but the dead, but I repeat, the borders between these three countries, you must think of them all in one world, like 3/3 of a circle, are not fixed. I'll start again. On the far end of the spectrum you have the really alive. These are generally people before they join the army, but unfortunately it also comes to include more and more soldiers and nurses, officers and batmen, the longer any of them survive, up to a point. Then they become wounded by default. I'll start again. The wounded, when they're really wounded, I don't know how else to say that, and mean nothing by it, i.e. when they're hit, cross over into a country that the unhit living simply never know. It doesn't happen quickly, but before you are aware, it has happened, and there you are, shock deep in pain, a denizen of vulnerability, and quite possibly death. At that point, if it wasn't already, everything becomes a charade. I don't mean false. I should have said show, because now you must seem yourself in order to be treated as yourself, which is your only chance. You'll never be unwounded, but you may be alive again if you're very, very careful. I haven't made my point. The point is that everything you describe in war, anything whatever you may say about it, is not war. War is not words, not even understanding. You may get a sense there of why I have a battalion of typesetters as my central character. War is the process by which large numbers of the living become the wounded and the dead, against their wills and in the most violent ways imaginable. We hardly ever hear from those countries, or we hear from them all the time, because we are them. Our mistake, if we have one, is always to look at things from a living perspective. The championing of this point of view has led to more nonsense being written than anything else in the world.